Welcome back, I'm Jude, and I'm excited about this video because this is really about the person who changed my life. He was completely radical, totally outside the box as far as spiritual teachers go, and he actually really didn't like being called a spiritual teacher, which is why I put it in the quotation marks. His life story is so crazy, it is a teaching unto itself, and it's like straight out of a comic book or something. It's like an origin story. And he's influenced so many amazing thinkers. Bruce Lee was actually hugely influenced by him. The whole foundations and philosophy of Jeet Kune Do, which is the martial art that Bruce Lee created, was completely informed by Krishnamurti. Alan Watts said he's one of the most original and profound thinkers in the world. Dalai Lama said Krishnamurti is one of the greatest philosophers of the age. Eckhart Tolle and A.H. Almaas, who I'm a big fan of, also speak very highly of him. So in this video, I'm going to do a brief introduction to him, his life story, and his core teachings, and especially how they influenced me. So I consider myself very lucky to have encountered Krishnamurti when I was 18. And before that, I was definitely kind of interested in some spiritual things. I actually grew up in a family of Tibetan Buddhists, but I didn't really get it. Like, I was kind of drawn in the direction, but I didn't really understand meditation. I didn't really know what it was about. And it was encountering Krishnamurti that really opened this up for me. So that was actually 20 years ago when I first encountered him. And I read him solid for about 2 years. Like every single day, I would only read Krishnamurti because I was so hooked. I was so in that vibe. I was learning so much. I was integrating it all. I was really thinking through the things he was saying. And then after about 2 years of reading him every day, I moved on. And I'll explain the reasons I moved on. And I haven't really gone back to him. I've gone back a few times. I haven't finished a whole book by him since that time. But without even reviewing his work, I wrote up this whole video of the most impactful ideas, how these ideas still today impact me, how they are really the foundation of my thinking, the foundation of my whole perspective view of the world, and how it really sets the perfect foundation for exploring the spiritual landscape. So the way I found out about Krishnamurti seems really synchronistic. So I went to this really cool alternative school in Toronto, and we had this really cool teacher who offered a philosophy class and did these really unconventional studies of philosophy. And we had one day where we read this essay by Krishnamurti called The Function of Education. It's quite a short essay. And I was like, oh, cool. I liked it. But that wasn't really what hooked me. What then happened was 2 other times his name came up randomly. One, I was reading an interview in a hip-hop magazine with the rapper named Chaos, if anyone remembers that guy. And he was talking about Krishnamurti and how much Krishnamurti inspired him. And then the other time was this random kid in school just randomly started talking to me about Krishnamurti. Something came up, I can't remember what it was, but he brought it up, and that was before the philosophy class thing, so it wasn't coming from the philosophy class. So these 3 instances of Krishnamurti coming up was kind of like, what's up with that? And I knew that his famous teaching, this really phrase that really sums up what he's all about, is truth is a pathless land. And at some point I was watching TV with my dad, and we were watching some show, and something happened, I cannot remember what, and I said, oh, truth is a pathless land. I just said it. And he looks at me and he's like, where did you hear that? And I was like, oh, it's Krishnamurti. And he's like, how do you know about Krishnamurti? And it turns out Krishnamurti was also influential for my dad, although my dad later got into Tibetan Buddhism and never mentioned him to me. But my dad was like, oh, I actually have a book by Krishnamurti on the bookshelf upstairs. So I was like, So I took it. I wasn't super eager at the time, but I had a 25-minute subway ride to school every morning and then back in the evening. And so sometimes I would read. So I started reading this on the subway to school. And so many times I passed my subway stop because I was so into the book. And sometimes I even would intentionally, on the way home from school, pass my subway stop, ride the train to the end of the line just so I could keep reading, and then ride it back just because I was in such a zone of not wanting to stop reading. So I think the real best introduction to Krishnamurti is to first tell his life story, because that in itself is such a powerful teaching. So back in the late 1800s, there was this group called the Theosophical Society. And they were a group of mystics and occultists. Essentially, they were an organization that had all this secret knowledge from all these past civilizations and cultures. And they really wanted to bring it back to the world. And there was a bunch of kooky characters. A lot of them were psychics. They were channelers. The 2 well-known ones were Charles Leadbeater and Madame Blavatsky. Now, this was a worldwide organization with plenty of prominent members. And they were super influential. Actually, the Wizard of Oz, the guy who wrote The Wizard of Oz, was a theosophist, and the whole story of the Wizard of Oz is inspired by the theosophical teachings of discovering, that we have this magic in us all along. but they were super influential. They had tons of members worldwide, and many of them were these kind of prominent psychics. And they had prophesized the coming of a world teacher, that there was going to be a new world teacher like a Buddha, like a Jesus, that was going to come and was going to essentially save humanity. So this was in the back of their mind. They're kind of waiting for this world teacher to emerge. And then Charles Leadbeater is in India, where he was living at the time, and he sees this kid on the beach. And I think Krishnamurti was like 9 at the time. And he said Krishnamurti had the purest aura he had ever seen, that there was no selfishness in it. It was just pure compassion. And so Krishnamurti's dad worked for the Theosophical Society. And somehow they convinced his family that your child is very special, he's very gifted, let us educate him, let us make him the next world teacher. They really thought he was this prophet who was going to bring salvation to the world. So they essentially took him away from his family in India and brought him to England and Europe and educated him on world religions, on philosophy, on all sorts of spiritual traditions, preparing him to be the world teacher. And this went on for quite a while, from when he was like 9 or something to his mid-20s. So there are all these stories about him having these really powerful awakening experiences during this time. And then they did this event where something happened, where everyone in the audience had some crazy experience. And they were really certain, this is the kid, this is the world leader that it's going to bring salvation to all of us. So they formed this organization called the Order of the Star of the East that was going to be the organization that was going to bring his teachings to the world. And they were just kind of waiting. They were just kind of setting this all up. So when they felt he was ready to take on the role, he could do it. So to make a long story short, he was growing, maturing, and they felt he was then becoming ready to actually take on this role as world teacher and to start giving these teachings at these big annual gatherings they were having. So the 1 year where he was really supposed to take on this role, he shows up and he basically says, I'm not doing it. He said, I'm dissolving the Order of the Star. And he gave this really brilliant speech that you can easily find. I'm going to link in the description. It's really worth reading. It's really straightforward and short. And he explains why he's not going to be their leader. And in essence, the reason is he was really contemplating the world. He was looking at what was happening. And this is all during World War I, or at least sometime around the time of World War I. And what he started to see really clearly was that creating an organization only serves to divide people further. His whole teaching is that truth is a pathless land, that you cannot arrive at it by following any path, by following any one person, by following any prescribed model, by following a guru or any of that. The metaphor he uses is that nobody can bring the top of the mountain down to you. You must ascend the mountain yourself. And so long as you're following the teachings or the morality or whatever of somebody else, you're not really looking for yourself. You're taking on somebody else's viewpoint and you're actually conditioning your mind. You're seeing things through a limited, narrow view. He also said that any attempt to organize truth will corrupt it. And you've seen this with all religions, that they argue over who's more true or what's more true. And he didn't want to be a part of that. He didn't want to say, we have the real truth over here and your truth is less true. He essentially said truth cannot be organized. And this is where this piece of authority comes in. He was so incredibly anti-authoritarian. What he really wanted was to free people unconditionally, to have this sense of total freedom. And so long as there's an authority there, you're not free. Any organization has, power structures and authority, and he just did not like that. He also really didn't like being called a teacher. He didn't like the idea of a student-teacher relationship. He said it corrupts both parties because the teacher's playing this role of teacher, and they're no longer fully human. They're no longer fully themselves. They're playing a role. It really limits how they can be, what they can see. And the same with the student. If you're a student, then you're just learning, you're just intaking, and it's kind of disempowering. You really want to empower people to be their own authority, or to really look inward for themselves and really challenge their ideas, their beliefs, all of that. One of the other themes in his work is the trap of identity. How identity only serves to divide and limit us and again obscures reality. That identity is just a fabrication. And to really get what he was saying here, you have to look at the backdrop of World War I, and he also taught and lived through World War II. That he was saying humanity is just a mess. We're just at war with each other constantly. And a big part of it is that we see each other as other or as different. That we identify with a certain nationalism or a certain race or whatever it is, and we think, okay, this is the best, or we judge somebody else on their identity. And he was saying that identity by its nature is always limiting. Again, he wanted to bring people a total sense of freedom where they can be free outside of any self-image, self-concept. And this meant that we can't have an identity or a fixed identity. And this really lines up with Buddhist teachings. So he wasn't unique in this way, but he was very clear. And he went further with the Buddhists because Buddhists are still Buddhists. And he was even saying, even being a Buddhist, even identifying with that is limiting. It is setting you apart from others. And really, there is no separation, which Buddhists also teach. There's no separation. So he, in some ways, was like a more radical Buddhist. And I think this is why the Dalai Lama said great things about him, even though Krishnamurti was kind of anti-Buddhist. Maybe anti is too strong of a word, but he was definitely challenging people on identifying with any religion, and he named Buddhism as well as pretty much all the other common religions at the time. Now this connects with another idea of his that he talked about a lot, which is how we're always projecting ideas, that we don't really see things, we're not really present with things as they are because we have this idea of what we're perceiving, and that often shuts us down from being fully, intimately, sensitively present with our experience. So he often uses this example of an oak tree, that you see an oak tree and you're like, oh yeah, that's an oak tree. You've seen oak trees before, you know what an oak tree is, but you're not really looking. So he says, get rid of all ideas, all previous conceptions of what an oak tree is or what a tree is at all, and look at it as if you're looking for the very first time. So a lot of Krishnamurti's writings and teachings were about really observing and being in awe of nature, and learning lessons directly from nature, from really deeply observing it. Now again, this is a common theme in Buddhism about having direct experience, this unbuffered experience with our world, not getting stuck in our head and ideas, but coming more and more into reality. And that's what he was really all about. And he said that we need great sensitivity, that we are not sensitive. We keep a bit of a distance from things, or there's just kind of a mess of thoughts and feelings going on, that we really have to come into our really fine, subtle sensitivity to really truly be present and learn and feel. And the unique thing about Krishnamurti is he never gave meditation instruction. He basically said that any form of structured meditation, any form of practice that's prescribed, that has specific rules of do this and don't do this, any form of that is conditioning. It's a further way of conditioning your mind. He said that awareness itself is what deconditions the mind. So what he was essentially saying was look for your own conditioning. Try to find the ways in which your mind has these habitual ways of thinking and feeling, and really challenge those. Really try to be fully present with them. And he said when you could be fully present with them, they are gone. You are no longer conditioned. But it's difficult to be fully present with these things. It's difficult to always see these things happening in action. So the only form of meditation practice he talked about, and he did talk about meditation a lot, was what he called open awareness practice. And now I actually have a practice, basically this, on my channel. I'll link to it up here right now. And I talk about the pros and cons. So at the time I was like, this is the way, but the reality is there's a lot of challenges that come up with this practice. And in that video I talk about why it's actually helpful to start with other practices first and then kind of work your way up, develop the skills of concentration, clarity, equanimity, and then do an open awareness practice. Then let go of all the techniques and just rest in that open awareness. And this really lines up with what a lot of other people teach. Adyashanti calls this practice true meditation. Shinzen Young calls it do nothing. In Tibetan Buddhism, it really lines up with Mahamudra and Dzogchen practice. It's not that this was necessarily new, it's just that the other traditions usually build up to it. Whereas Krishnamurti was saying, no, don't condition yourself, just go for it. I don't know how helpful his approach is. I do not actually fully agree. I think he was too radical in this sense. And this is why I teach people techniques. Because as much as I got out of Krishnamurti, I didn't progress in my meditation practice when I was really trying to do what he was saying, and he never really even told me what to do. But this is why I think he forms such a great foundation, is that you have this perspective that none of these techniques are the be-all end-all. That none of these traditions or teachers or any of that, none of them are actually going to give you what you're looking for, that you could only truly discover on your own. And so I approach all practices, all teachers with this idea of that this is a tool to help bring me more into freedom. But I don't glamorize the tool. I don't cling to the tool. I just use it for what it does and then I discard it. Because the real thing that we're looking for is our own freedom, our own direct experience, and not to idolize any teacher, practice, tradition, any of that. So the last idea that I really want to put out, something that Krishnamurti always talked about and came back to, is this idea around beliefs, the necessity or actually the non-necessity of beliefs. Now what he said was that beliefs are always limiting, that they always color your experience, they always limit your experience. That is the nature of belief. that when you believe something, your mind is no longer open. You're no longer really paying attention. You're not really sensitive to what's happening. And so he really pushed you to challenge your beliefs. And I love this, and I constantly do it. So whenever I catch myself in a belief pattern, I notice that I really side with a certain viewpoint. I actively go out and I try to find the really smart opposing viewpoints, and that will help to soften the belief. Now, this doesn't mean that we can't have values that we stand by. Having a value is not quite the same as having a belief. So I have a lot of values that I stand by, but these are open to changing. And beliefs are really insidious. They can sneak up on you. A lot of beliefs that we have, we don't even realize we have them. A lot of them are in our unconscious mind. So it's really great to start analyzing our experience, to see what beliefs, what biases we're holding, and to see if we can soften those, and to see how that can actually open our mind and being to more possibilities and to a more full experience of reality. And on top of that, being able to learn better. Krishnamurti was really adamant that one of the top barriers to learning new things is thinking that we already know. Just this idea of knowing, not even belief, but just thinking you know something, keeps you from investigating further. Thinking you know what an oak tree is, or thinking you know yourself, or thinking you know another person. The feeling of knowing limits you from actually learning more about these things. So these are the core ideas I kind of wanted to bring forward. If you're into reading him, the first book I would recommend starting with is called Think on These Things. And this is actually adapted from a collection of talks that he gave young people in India. So the talks are geared towards young people, but they're still very challenging. Not challenging intellectually, but challenging where he challenges you to really think about your life, really think about what's important to you, about what life is about why you're alive and what you want to do with your life, and what's actually truly meaningful. And again, he doesn't give many answers here. He shows you what isn't important. He helps you discard all of these layers and ideas and dogmas so you can become more and more free and you can see more clearly. But he doesn't tell you what is true. Now then, if you want to step up to maybe like a more advanced, even more challenging book, there's a really good one that's quite short called Freedom from the Known. And I love the title. It's probably my favorite book title ever, that Freedom from the Known, because this whole Western idea that knowledge is like the top level of intellect or mind, that's the real supreme thing, is knowing. And Krishnamurti is just talking about how knowing is so limiting to intellect actually. And we want to actually create freedom from knowing. Now, that doesn't mean that knowing things on a certain level, certain stage is super helpful and relevant, but ultimately we can't hold these things so rigidly. We have to be able to transcend them. He has a famous quote that goes something like, observing without analyzing is the highest form of intelligence. And now he's not saying it's the only form of intelligence, that observing without analyzing is the only form. There's plenty of forms of intelligence, but the highest form, he said, is observing without analyzing, which is really transcending the thinking mind, that there's something beyond it that has more significance, more importance, and more truth, and more freedom. Now, that's it for this video. I'm going to post some Krishnamurti quotes, I think, in the description. Let me know if you have any comments, questions, all of that. I love to hear comments. Really nice to connect with you all out there. Thank you for tuning in. If you're not already subscribed, please subscribe. I'm kind of on a roll here with content. There's lots more to come. And sign up for my newsletter if you're into this stuff, because I'm going to start writing more and putting more work into the newsletter. I really like writing, but I haven't really had an outlet. So more writing, short writing, ideas, all this stuff is going to be coming in the newsletters. Link in the description. Thank you all.